you only have an idea of how it is that you need to improve, right? And often that idea of what that is so far removed from the person that you actually are.
Mm-hmm.
So that you end up just spending a lot of time just turning your wheels, pursuing things that are actually not particularly important or meaningful for you as a person. You know, maybe they're meaningful for someone else, but it can send you in all these sort of wild goose chases of this person that you think you're supposed to be, as opposed to honoring the person that you are. And it's only through that sort of that being able to sit in nothing, in being able to do nothing for a moment, that I think that you can actually get a glimpse.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Welcome, folks. It is I, Evan, and on the other end is Brandon, here doing this Way of the Artist podcast thing once again. And today we've kind of got an interesting one, and I'm intrigued to see where this one goes. This is the art of doing nothing. And I'll fully admit that I this is an art that I feel like I'm certainly no master of, and in fact am probably a horrifying amateur at this, as I think that many people probably are, when it really comes down to thinking about like doing nothing. How often do we really actually do nothing? Why is it important to do nothing? All of this stuff. And yeah, this seemed like a good topic to have to discuss. It seemed like a very serendipitous or synchronistic conversation to have, because I was watching an interview of a couple of people discussing some of the ideas of the German philosopher Heidegger, and then shortly after, Brandon sent me this really fascinating article that had a lot to do with our topic, and we thought, you know what, why don't we dive into it and really explore, see what we come out with on the other side. So, Brandon, what are your opening remarks for the peoples?
One thing that I've learned in life is that if you're busy all the time, you don't have time to think, and you definitely don't have time to create, because you're too busy doing something. And creativity exists in the non-doing, really. It's that period of doing nothing where, you know, ideas can flow. And sometimes I think a very tedious task can almost satisfy that, where you're doing something where it's almost like you're not really doing it at all, because you're not even thinking about it, and it needs almost no conscious attention. And so I think that's why a lot of times people, when they're having a shower or when they're on the toilet or something like that, or brushing their teeth, these types of very almost mundane, tedious, repetitive tasks that we're so used to doing, and you don't really even need to think about it. You just know how to do it. Maybe when you're driving is another example. Mm-hmm. And yes, you are doing something, but not enough to take your conscious attention. And so I think something that we're talking about is, I mean, yes, ideally you can actually be still, have no distractions, have nothing that's occupying you, and let yourself just be in the nothing, in the silence, in the whatever you want to call it. But I think that sometimes we end up meeting that demand at least 90%. Maybe it's only 60%, but it's enough to actually get some things going, where you're driving or you're walking or you're doing something like having a shower, and these ideas can come through. And so I think what we're talking about is, we're talking about the power of those moments and why they're important, and even, dare I say, nurturing it, which is very weird in our society today, because if, you know, people have this perception that if you're not doing something, you're being lazy or you're wasting time. And, you know, says who, right? says what, and what demands, what values are saying that that's a waste, right? If all it is, if all your life is about getting stuff done and being productive and, producing something, to what end and why? And why does that matter really? And have you ever stopped to think about that and consider it? Or is it just that's what we do, and maybe it's not what we do. Maybe it's maybe there's something that's going on that you're missing out on. I'll mention one other thing that I think is kind of interesting. Did you know that cults get their followers generally to be really, really busy? And they make sure that they don't get enough sleep, and they make sure they're always occupied with something. And part of that is because that actually helps the brainwashing to actually occur. Because when you don't have time to critically think and ponder and wonder about what it is that you're actually doing and what's going on, you're less likely to have the time and energy, because if you're tired as well, you don't have the energy to just think about it and go, wait a minute, this is kind of weird. That's a little weird. Let me look into that. And you don't even have time to look into these thoughts that you might have. And so, we are in a culture. I'm not gonna necessarily say that this culture is a cult, but in a way, busyness makes us not question our life. It makes us go down these paths and these roads, and we just go, well, that's what my parents did. That's what my family does, And so, it can be a little disruptive to stop and start asking questions, not just for you, but for everyone around you.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not going to be afraid to go there. Like I think that, yeah, absolutely. Like our culture has a cult of productivity and busyness, right? Like we have a cult of it. We have an obsession about it, where it's like where we feel bad about ourselves. We feel guilty about taking time to do nothing. And even when we're doing nothing, we're actually almost never doing nothing. Like even our nothing time we filled with stuff, right? Like the stuff that we categorize as doing nothing, right? Where it's like, oh, you have this free time and free space. Okay, what am I going to do with it? Right? It's still this thing like, what am I going to do with this nothing space? I've got to fill it with something. I've got to watch a movie, or listen to a podcast. Do it like we got to, and all of these things are there's nothing inherently wrong with anything really, like with doing these things, but I think that it's more so our attitude, our approach to it, where it's this almost it's like this restless it's a kind of this restless obsession with having to do something with ourselves, right? Just keeping ourselves busy, even in our leisure time, even in our downtime. You've got to fill it with something, which is, I think to me, that's part of one of the most sort of immediate impacts of meditation, right? Where it's like, I remember an old mentor of mine used to make this joke of, I call meditation taking a break from my shit. Right. And it's like, it kind of is, it's dedicating a certain amount of time to nothing. Right. But even then, like that's one of the big challenges of meditation, because meditation is something that people do for some reason, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, I'm doing this to, for these outcomes. And anyone who's spent any time with meditation and learning about it will tell you that it's like, oh yeah, like when you step into a meditation with this idea of, I'm doing this to relax, I'm doing this to become calmer, I'm doing this to, that's not what meditation is. Meditation is actually is part of this practice, this art of truly doing nothing. Mm-hmm. Right? There's no purpose for it. There's no like complete letting go of all of this shit. And something that is kind of a funny thing that I've really been, that I feel like I discover more and more about meditation is that, oh yeah, this is why one of like the first things that one of the main ways in which people learn to meditate is to just focus on your breath, right? Whether you're focusing on the sensation of the air coming in through your nose, like the cool air coming in, the warm air going out, or the feeling of your stomach or diaphragm expanding and contracting, just whatever you put your focus on, right? Because the idea, the whole notion is that like, no, because there's nothing going on in your mind in meditation that's worth it to a certain extent. That's not the function, right? Because no matter what you're thinking about in the meditation, because your mind can present all kinds of busy work while you're just sitting there that can feel very important, right? Like it can feel very like you have to pay attention to this thought. You have to give this your attention now, right? And it's just like, no. Like that, this is just put your attention back on your breath. Just completely let that go, because it's that restlessness, that constant obsession of having to give these things our attention and create busy work even in the midst of doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When the task is actually like, no, don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like just sit here and breathe. Right? But we can't even do that. Like it's a fascinating, I don't necessarily know where I was going with that, but yeah.
Well, I think you're bringing in some really valid point and a really important part of this, because, you know, as we're talking about all of this, just one thing that comes to my attention is that how often is a person actually present in their life? Like, how much are they in the past and in the future? Like, and so much of thought exists outside of the present moment. And that's part of the reason why, you know, learning to not entertain it, learning to not engage with it, especially when it's taking you somewhere other than here. And there's all sorts of reasons why people convince themselves that they need to go to the past or they need to go to the future. And it can be very seductive. And what you don't realize, though, is that the trade-off is that it's not actually giving you what you think it's giving you. That's the first thing. It's like a bad deal that way, because a lot of the time, and I'd say most of the time, sometimes maybe, but it's giving you what you need, or it's giving you something valuable. But most of the time, it's not. Most of the time, all it's doing is creating worry or anxiety or shame or guilt or something like that, something that's not necessarily an ideal feeling in this present moment or whatever. And so then you can become addicted to this. You can become addicted to future thinking and past thinking. And I know, because I have, and it's a weird thing, because when you're in it and you like don't know how to get out of it, you're like, well, I just keep doing it. I just keep rehashing the past, keep rehashing the past. And then it's like, oh no, now I keep worrying about the future, whatever. So that's one part, is like, you know, this doing nothing is about being present, right? Because there is nothing that needs to be done in the moment and except be. And there's something about that that's the most important thing you can do at all. And then there's the other part of this, which I think is worth just kind of throwing in, because we're talking about cult and culture and all of that. And this, you know, we also have a bit of a cult of self-improvement now. And that actually goes very nicely hand in hand with the cult of productivity, because it's like, be productive, be a productive human being, get stuff done. How much did you get done? How good are you at getting it done? You know?
Yeah. And if you're improved, then you can be more productive.
Exactly. You know, there's this famous story in Russia. I think it was like during World War II, maybe it was World War I, but about this, you know, Russian worker, and he just outperformed everybody. And so then he became this kind of, they tried to make him into like a hero and make him like, and they wanted everyone else to like idolize him, because they wanted everyone else to be productive like him, right? And so there's a benefit. You gotta think about it, like, who wants you to be busy? Is it you that wants you to be busy, or does someone benefit off you being busy? And that's you know, when you're talking about a literal cult, then you should really ask that question. Because usually the cult leader is manipulating all their followers to get what they want done, and they need you busy. They want you busy because it helps them, right? And so, you know, you don't have to look too far to look into our culture and say, hey, you know, like maybe my employer, maybe my politicians, maybe people like that are benefiting off me doing this work that they want me to do because it gets them something, and, you know, whatever. And so, not to say that you shouldn't do it, but that maybe you're falling into the inertia of what someone else thinks is right and what's best. And so I'll just finish this thought here with this self-improvement. You know, I love this quote in, I think it's in Fight Club. I think what they say, something like self-improvement is masturbation. And it kind of is, you know, because it's like, what are you doing? You're just trying to make yourself feel better about yourself. And like, you know, what, like, for what? For what cause? And what I often find with people, you know, and this is just my opinion and my observation, and disagree with me if you like, but a lot of people that do self-improvement don't improve jack. Like, they actually don't get better at all. In fact, they don't do anything, but they act like they're learning and they're getting, it's like you haven't really done anything really to be better. Like, you're not actually better. You just feel like you're better. And I think there's a lot of self-improvement, which is not self-improvement at all. It's just a feeling of self-improvement. Because in most cases, people self-improve by applying themselves to something and improve out of necessity. But when you do self-improvement for the sake of self-improvement, I find very rarely does anybody improve. And you know, if you might disagree with me hearing that in this moment, but start looking. You'll begin to see it's usually self-improvement comes out of necessity rather than this, like, yeah, I'm just going to go and I'm going to improve this, right? It's kind of a strange thing, you know. It's a real distraction, actually.
Oh man. I feel like you just opened up like a whole, you know, can of worms here, and it's just like, which worms do we start picking through?
And for what reason, Evan?
And for what reason? I mean, yeah, it is like that whole, you know, your comment there about, you know, because yeah, the notion of self-improvement is like, well, improved in what, for what, in relation to what? Like, it's all about, you know, and I understand it because it's like the sort of illusion of self-improvement is that it's just like, oh, it'll make me happier. If I'm improved, I'll be happier. I think that's really, you know, and like that's at the heart of it. It's like, you know, we're all just trying to be happier human beings, happier, more peaceful human beings. I truly, genuinely believe that. And self-improvement seems like the way to do it because we live in a, you know, in a culture and society that's just like, oh, well, you know, if you work at this and you do these things and you follow this system and you do this structure, but that's just not the way it works, right? Not everything who we are can't be broken down in that kind of way. Our state of well-being can't necessarily be reduced in that sort of in a, I guess, a kind of like materialistic sort of fragmentary kind of process, right? Which works well for us to understand a lot of things, you know, like, you know, science is very much like a process of breaking things down in a way that we can understand how to, I guess, sort of manipulate things in a way that can be potentially beneficial, right? So it's like, it's not that it's completely without utility, but it's just that it's there's, I think, I don't have the words or the thought for it necessarily, but like there's a trap, you know, there's a trap from the outset in the whole thing, because it's not like, you know, doing, you know, incorporating like a new sort of pattern behavior into your life won't breed, you know, positive results in your life, because absolutely it can, but there's something that's just there's a mistaken attitude towards it, you know, because I can't put my finger on it, but there's something. Maybe you can see something in this, brand, because I can't quite feel it out. It's just like an intuition at this moment in time, but it's just like, no, but there's just something a little bit fucked up, you know, in that beginning attitude of self-improvement, right? And it's like we've mentioned it before, you know, like one of our favorite Alan Watts, you know, like has this great line where he's like, the problem with self-improvement is that the part of you that needs to improve is the part that's telling you need to improve. Something to that effect, right? Like it's just the part of you that's making you feel like you're not enough is the one that's telling you need to improve. Mm-hmm. But it's the part of you that's telling you you're not enough. If you weren't telling yourself you weren't enough, you wouldn't feel the need to improve, right? And this is one of those kind of bizarre pieces of our, you know, human psychology, where it's like we think that we need to have this sense of needing to improve ourselves. It's like, oh, well, then if I don't feel the need to improve myself, then I won't grow, I won't learn, I won't, like, all of these things, like all of these things won't happen. And I think that's complete kind of nonsense, right? Because it's like you only have an idea of how it is that you need to improve, right? And often that idea of what that is so far removed from the person that you actually are. Mm-hmm. So that you end up just spending a lot of time just turning your wheels, pursuing things that are actually not particularly important or meaningful for you as a person. You know, maybe they're meaningful for someone else, but it can send you on all these sort of wild goose chases of this person that you think you're supposed to be, as opposed to honoring the person that you are. And it's only through that sort of that being able to sit in nothing, and being able to do nothing for a moment, that I think that you can actually get a glimpse of what it is that you can actually do, right? What it is that the direction to actually take for you. Because otherwise you're just caught up in thought. Mm-hmm. You know, like you're just constantly going through thoughts, and like another one of Alan Watts's things is just like, you know, if you're always just thinking about your thoughts, then you don't have time to have any new thoughts, right? You don't have time for anything new to enter, for you to even have a new thought about something, because you're just constantly thinking about all the thoughts that you got going on. There's nothing new that's actually coming in. I feel like I'm just kind of saying a bunch of stuff right now. I'm kind of wandering. I'm wandering around in the woods right now, and just kind of like pointing out, you know, every tree and fucking rock that I could see. So I think I'm just gonna stop for a moment.
A rock. A rock. Another tree. Another tree. Oh, another rock. Yeah. Well, you know. Okay. So, I think one thing is kind of interesting, right? Is like the part of you, because I struggled with this a lot of my life. It still comes up every now and then. I'm just better at dealing with it. But this whole thing about not being good enough, right? And then, you know, like maybe it's not being lovable. You know, it's like stuff like that, right? But I don't feel this is too far fetched from like what a lot of people experience. Not everybody or most, but so, you know, if you say, okay, well, I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable, or whatever that weird thought might be, and maybe you haven't named it that, but maybe it's something like that. You go, well, okay, so I do this and then I'm good enough, right? I do this and then I'm lovable, right? And so then, you know, the part of you that doesn't feel lovable or doesn't feel good enough doesn't want to be satisfied. And this is the first thing to really wrap your head around, because it's a trickster. Because the moment you solve it, it's dead, and it doesn't want to die. It wants to live, and it doesn't just want to live, it wants to be strong.
Yeah.
And so it knows that if it has you, the more it has you, the better it is. And you got to understand that there's something about this not good enough, not lovable, right? Like if that relates to anyone out there, like that's just what I labeled it, or how I tried to understand it, right? It's just a label, it's just a trying to understand. But this thing, you think you want to solve it, but you don't realize what you're getting out of it. So you think, well, if I'm lovable and I'm good enough, then why would I do anything that I do? I like doing what I do. And what I do, I've worked really hard, and like it's given me purpose. Because so now if all of a sudden I'm lovable and I'm good enough, then I won't want to do that anymore, because the reason why I was doing that was so I was lovable and good enough. And so then you're addicted to not being lovable and not being good enough, because if you heal it or resolve it, now you're not going to want to do whatever it is that you deem important in your life. And so you see the bind, and it goes like that. It just actually, then it gets onto another thing and another thing and another thing. And pretty soon you're just trapped in this whole thing of, and so if you take away the lacking that you feel, and you resolve it, in a sense, why would you do anything that you do? And that's actually a more scary place to be than to be in the pain of not lovable and not good enough. So when it comes right down to brass tacks, and it comes down to that moment where you can make a choice, hey, resolve this and you'll be done with it. Or but now you'll have to find out, now you'll have to question your whole life and figure out why you do anything that you do. Or you can question everything you think and you want to do, but whatever. And so like what happens is people go, well, that's way too painful. I'll just stick with this whole not good enough, not lovable thing, because actually in a weird way, it's easier. And so I'll just keep stuffing it, and I'll just keep pretending it's not there, and I'll just keep hiding it. And maybe if I hide it well enough, it won't influence my life. But guess what? No, that's not how it works. What it's going to do is the more you stuff it, the bigger and stronger it's going to get down there. And one day it's going to start rearing its head, and it's going to not just come out in like maybe your job or your work or something, but it'll come up in your relationships. It'll come out with your kids. It'll come out with your friends. It'll come out with everything. And then you'll be like, oh my God, I got to deal with this thing again. Okay. Stuff, and you'll play this whack-a-mole game with it for just the rest of your life. And you'll try to be busy, because busy is a great way to distract yourself from it. You see the trap? And then, if it's self-improve enough, I can get over it, right? But no, the self-improvement is just a distraction. It's just a whack-a-mole method you're using to hide from it. And quite honestly, if you're actually just trying to self-improve for this reason and not for a purpose, not to build something, not to create something, not to do something, you will most likely find that you didn't even improve at all. And then you're like, what was the point of all that? And it was like, don't you see, there wasn't really a point. It was a point to run from your feelings. That was the point. And if you just get honest with the fact that you're running from your feelings, then maybe you can actually face the music and like, look at what this actually is here. And it's tough, man. Like, we get addicted to our desires and our ambitions and our whatever we're trying to do in the world. And because I've been on a bit of a spiritual journey, I'd say, for like the last almost decade. And I would say that one thing I've noticed from a few people is they go, well, I don't want to do that, because if I did that, then what if I didn't have any motivation anymore for my business? I'm like, I get it. Yeah, because you're building your business based on a shadow. You're building your business based on a fear you have. And what if you erase that fear? Then you wouldn't want to build your business. And who would you be without your business? Because your business is your identity. And better just keep the fear. Better just keep that in place.
Yeah. And it's I've heard it said before that we don't actually fear the unknown. We fear losing what we have.
Yeah.
And I think that that's, part of the illusion of sort of like this busyness, always doing, is that's how we create things in our lives. That's how things, how things happen. But I think that there's many sort of examples of nature, and lots of the great wisdom traditions have observed this, have commented on this sort of pattern of nature, that it's actually in the nothing. It is actually in that space of silence. So there's lots of different words that have been used for it. There's nothing, there's void, there's the silence, there's the, that it's only from that place that you actually understand the truest action for yourself, the truest action that exists for you. But you have to shut off all of that noise of keeping busy, and a word that came up for me as well, and this is comparison. Comparison is such a huge part of our, again, that like with that self-improvement thing, like we're comparing ourselves to other people. And again, one of the great wisdoms from the tradition says, like, comparison is like, will fucking destroy you. You are incomparable. Like who you are as a person, like if once you get really connected to this person that you actually are, which is interesting because it's kind of connected to our last podcast.
Yeah, these things
about who you are, right? But it's like when you're connected to that thing, you begin to actually understand what appropriate actions to take. So that's the thing, is that it's like you don't just sit in nothing and then that's forever what happens. It's you actually, because nature exists in this space of nothing and something, right? They go together with each other. But we're not when we don't allow that nothing space in our life, we're just constantly filling it with something, and it creates, I guess, like a disharmony. Which is why we get so confused and feel the need for, like, we've got to improve, and we just try and throw more busyness and productivity on top of the problem is already like that you're just too busy. Like the problem is that you're just filling too much space up, and learning how to really take that space. And that's, I don't have a good answer, or for people like how to do that. Like I'm as much a work in progress on this too, because it's a real challenge. It's a real deep sort of conditioning and programming that we all have to just continue to be busy. And the way to fix things or to get to find out the answers is to just get busier. But as you said, we have these things of like where people have had their revelations going for a walk, in the shower, sitting on a toilet, like doing these nothing things where they're just allow sort of rest to enter just briefly, and something comes out of it, right? And one of the things that before we started recording, man, Alan's just showing up a lot in this conversation. But the metaphor for music or sound is that all of sound is this constant on-off switch, because sound is comprised of these waves and then these gaps of nothing. And those gaps are as important to the sound, to the way that the sound comes out, as the actual waves are. They impact. It's not just a constant wave. There's these spaces of silence in between those waves that give us the low notes, the high notes, the different qualities. Every sound that you've ever heard in existence is comprised of these waves and gaps, right? Which is pretty insane when you think about it. Like, it's pretty wild that somehow nothing is essential to the incredible I don't know what the word is, like, it's like variety doesn't even do it justice, but the incredible spectrum, I guess, the incredible spectrum of sounds that exist in the world. Like, it's infinite, the amount of sounds, but it's like, it's all based on this something nothing relationship that goes together. The sound doesn't disappear just because of those gaps. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's pretty wild to think about. And I think that when we observe these things in nature, and I think understand ourselves as a part of nature, you know, we can learn a lot from that. And there are maybe moments where we get glimpses at this principle, you know, coming into action, where it's like you know, like, where I've had moments, like one that just pops into my head was just like, I just remember one fall afternoon just sitting on a bench in the sun, just laying on a bench in the sun, and just having this incredible sense of clarity. You know, like, I wasn't trying to do anything. It was just like a moment of, I wasn't trying to do anything. I was actually just following a real, genuine impulse that I had. And I think that we're so disconnected from that side of ourselves. We're so disconnected from our intuitive, spontaneous sides of ourselves, because we're so trained to just logicalize our way through everything. But I think that's a big part of this as well, is that logicalizing side of ourselves, as wonderful, useful, and beautiful as that part is, can create very often just a ton of confusion as well, you know, where we ignore the feeling that we have in our bones, so to speak, because we're listening to all kinds of rationalizations, and then only to discover after the fact that, like, oh, I wish I just listened to my gut feeling. I wish I'd listened to that thing that was telling me that, you know, something was wrong with this situation, or this wasn't the right direction to go, or this was the direction to go, and I didn't follow that. I didn't follow that feeling and that instinct. And to hear those feelings and those instincts, it requires that space of nothing.
Yeah, I agree. The moments of silence. It's like, watch this. Did you see it? Did you hear it? And it's like, everything that happens when there's that moment, right? It makes the next thing, like, it makes it meaningful. And this is the thing about busyness. And this is what I think, you know, something I've learned through just like entrepreneurship. Like, one of the core principles I've come to understand, I think, about entrepreneurship is that you look at busyness as a bad thing. Because if you're busy's good in a way, but it's bad in a certain way. So it's good to be busy. Like, it's good to have business, but it's not good to have busyness. It's good to have business, but it's not good to have busyness. And busyness is anything you do that doesn't actually get you the result or the outcome or the thing that you're actually trying to work towards, like all of that stuff should be minimized or eliminated. And that's why, with business and with entrepreneurship, that's why you often hire out, and that's why you start to get people to take care of things, because, oh, that keeps me busy and stops me from doing business, which is really what I'm here to do. And so if it's a busy quality, then you look at it as how do I outsource it? How do I get rid of it? How do I get it off my plate? And then that busyness becomes someone's job, right? And so now your job and what you get paid hourly to do in a lot of cases is you get paid to do what's busyness for that business owner. And as a company or a business or, entrepreneurial endeavor grows, there becomes more busyness and more complications. And so then there's more jobs, and that's how jobs exist. Jobs exist for the busyness. So basically, as an entrepreneur or business person, what you're trying to do is not have jobs. You're trying to actually get rid of jobs and outsource jobs and eliminate jobs so that you can focus on doing what actually needs to get done. And that's kind of how that works. But like our lives are like that, right? So we have all this stuff that keeps us busy, but it doesn't actually do anything towards getting us where we're trying to go or what we're trying to do or what we're trying to accomplish or make in the world, right? And so like,
or I'd just add one more thing, or it
sure.
doesn't, or also just doesn't reflect who we actually are or what's actually meaningful to us. That makes sense.
Well, yeah, and I think that's probably the most important thing, because it's not
busyness doesn't reflect what our actual nature is.
Yeah, and it's productivity, but for reasons that don't necessarily align with great purpose and meaning and vision and stuff like that, right? And so like it's challenging because busyness is actually quite seductive, and I found this in my own life where it's like you can find comfort in being busy, or at least I know I can, and I'm pretty confident that a lot of people actually would agree if they really stopped to consider it, to stop to do nothing to consider it. But yeah, because like busyness can feel really good. You're not really doing anything to move the thing forward, really. Nothing really that really is meaningful and matters and is making a huge impact. But you kind of feel like you're doing something. Mm-hmm. And, and it feels good to feel like you're doing something, especially when you feel like quite certain that you can get the result you want to get. But a lot of our most meaningful stuff, it doesn't come with certainty. And I think that's why a lot of people choose busyness over actual meaningful, important doings, so to speak. And I think just kind of like just bring this all around in a way, or partly at least, is like you do nothing so that you can figure out to some degree what actually matters and what you would actually do. So when you stop and then you take action, that action came out of the nothing. So it became important. It wasn't just an inertia. You had to shift into that gear. You had to consciously decide, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. This is what I'm exploring or uncovering or working, right? And so then action actually matters. And I'll go back to this example. Did you see it? You hear that? See, now what happens is that silence, it matters. Even the moments that are not spoken, right? And like predictably, your mind can go like, how many words is he going to say in one sentence? You know what I mean? And your mind is now paying attention, right? And that's part of life. Like you got to look at busyness as you're not paying attention. You're actually not present. You're not there. Your mind is working so fast. And this is one of the things that's kind of why thought is such an issue. your mind is working so fast to be predictive all the time. It's always just trying to go, 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 go. This is what's going to happen. I've already seen this before. This is how it works. This is how it goes, whatever. And then when something stops us, catches our attention, makes us pay attention, we all of a sudden go, wait, not quite what I expected. Oh, and it matters. You see, it matters. And this is like a really weird way to speak because it's so not normal. And the mind is going, you're going to say this, right? And it's trying to work. You got to understand that's how your mind is working. So if you can't let it like not be dominating you, are you even thinking anymore? Like, are you even conscious of your life anymore? Or is your brain just getting you into an inertia of, yeah, I've already seen this before. This is how it works. This is how it goes. This is how everything goes. And it makes me comfortable. Mm-hmm. And you think about it, it's like busyness is comfort, right? And there's nothing wrong with being comfortable, but also when you see comfort is getting in the way of your happiness, your life, your fulfillment, you like everything you want to build and do and whatever. That's kind of, I think that's part of what we're talking about here. Because like, it's not exactly comfortable to do nothing at first, especially at first. I mean, you know this, I know this, right? Meditation can be a real difficult. Why would I even meditate? You know what I mean? Like, that's one of the questions that comes up.
Yeah.
What am I even doing here? It's like, that's it. You're not trying to do anything. What does that even mean? I don't get it, you know? And that's struggle. I don't get it, right? That's painful. That's not comfortable.
Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft, available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe. Yeah, exactly. Like, what am I supposed to be doing here? Which is, I think, it's definitely one of the big struggles that comes out of something like meditation. But yeah, it's like the busyness, again, I think it's so tied into how, into our minds, like the patterns of our minds and the busyness. Because, like, don't get me wrong, like I feel like with anything, there are periods of activity and there are periods of inactivity. You know what I mean? Which is maybe another way of looking at it, right? Which is like not necessarily about being busy, but it's like there are certain periods where, like you are required to, there's an energetic activity that's required of something, and you do it in the times that it is necessary. But I think that we just kind of try and stay in that gear all the time, right? Like, we're supposed to be in that gear all the time. And she's like, no, you're not supposed to be in that gear all the time. Like, there's a time for that, but not always. It is important, which is why it's like, and we are getting better, I think, as a culture in recognizing this of like, hey, like you need some time of rest. You need to take some time to, go and do nothing, whatever that is to you, go out into the woods, get onto a beach, or just step away from, that constant activity that we're always consumed with. It's so interesting. Like, in this conversation, I've been thinking just in terms of how this relates to a lot of what I work on actors with, and in teaching them, because so much of what I actually teach actors to do initially is to not do anything. Like, don't do anything. Like, I just want you to be with this person. I don't want you to act. I don't want you to try and be emotional. I want you to try and put on a performance. I just want you to look at the other person across from you and just, say what you notice. Right? What do you notice about that person over there? What do you think about that person over there? What are you getting from them? How are they behaving? How does that speak to you, right? And it's one of the challenges for actors, because it's like there's this sense of I don't feel like I'm doing anything, right? Like I'm not doing anything, and there's this distrust of that. There's this distrust of that feeling of not doing anything. But yet what we start to discover and find out is that through this process, there's all of these things that start to emerge. All of these qualities start to emerge when you're really just being with another person presently, from moment to moment to moment. And that's that, the actors, the person starts to have all of these incredible emotions start coming out of them, of themselves. The person who they are just kind of can't help but just show up to the process. And that only happens in this kind of space of silence, right? Where you're getting sort of out of your head. You're leaping out of this sort of the palace of your mind and your thoughts. And what happens when you do that, when you let more and more and more and more of that go. And for actors, it translates to actors who are actually more responsive, more alive, more spontaneous, more emotionally available and open, and all of these beautiful qualities just start coming through, right? The actor's innate sort of humanity and who they are actually is given some space to just exist and be. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if never, but like I just in terms of, for me, having a kind of understanding of like, oh yeah, that's in many ways, it's kind of creating this space of nothing, to allow something different to come through that's outside of the normal way in which we function, act, behave, that's always just trying to control things, is trying to force things, is trying to will things to happen constantly, right? And I think part of the lesson that I learned from, doing Meisner work and through teaching is that it's like, you don't need to force it at all. In fact, the less you force it, the more you come alive. Mm-hmm. The more you are actually able to do all of the things that you want to do as an actor and that we want to see in actors. So, and it all comes from, this place of nothing. I think that that's like, it's, creation really, creativity, however you want to put that. That's where it comes from. And again, I've been speaking a lot. I'm going to wrap it up here on this point, but it's like, there's, if you look at I think that Zen is great for this. And Zen has a connection to Taoism, as well. So they have a lot of commonalities, but it speaks to this sort of phenomenon or this philosophy, probably more directly than anything else I've really come across. But there's this sense that like all of nature, all of life kind of bursts from the void. What they call the void. And the void isn't like just like this dark nothing, but it's the space of all possibility, right? It's the pattern of all possibility. But it's kind of, it's one of those things that's like, it's not really something you can conceptualize, but it's the place from which all things just sort of emerge, and it's this complete openness for all things to emerge, and to come into existence. And a lot of sort of Zen art reflects this. When you look at like Zen painters, it's like it's all comes from this thing of like these things just sort of emerging or bursting from the void, where it's like a landscape just kind of like comes out of this hazy nothing, and haikus are very similar in a sense that a great haiku just kind of encapsulates just a moment, in this like almost of this very abbreviated form. And it just like, it's like it just punches you with these images and sounds. Like, it's just like, boom, did you get it? Like, did you see that? And like, like something so simple, like, birds flying over a lake, right? But it's like, it presents it to you in this way of like this spontaneous life just happening in the moment, right? And coming out of this sort of this nothing, it just emerges. And again, I don't know necessarily where I was going with that one, but but yeah, man, like it's creativity comes from the nothing space. Like real creativity comes from the nothing space. It doesn't come from the constant busyness and something. It requires that stillness.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one thing that's coming to my mind is there's so much going on all the time that you never have to worry about there not being anything, because there's always something. Like, did you will your heart to beat for the last 10 minutes? Did you do that? Was that you? But yet it did. And can you stop? Could you hear your heartbeat? Could you feel it? Is it there? Well, has it been happening? Oh, it's happening. And so there's this whole system, there's this whole thing, and it's all happening. It's all so busy just doing what it's doing. And so when you begin to see that, like, there's a nature and a flow to everything, you begin to respond to it as well, because that's the other part about busyness. You're not responding to the nature of what's going on. I don't know if you've ever sailed, Evan, but I've done a bit of it. And sailing is interesting because you're working with two pretty powerful mediums at the same time. You're working with wind and you're working with water. And when you're in the ocean, oh man, those waves, man, they can get huge. And I haven't even experienced the extremes that they can even get to, right? But I've been in some pretty big ones, and I've been with some pretty powerful wind. I've been to add wind so powerful that, it starts to get frightening, especially when you're out in the water with the sail. And then, there's a lot of things going on, right? So the wind is pushing a certain way. The water is responding a certain way. And that water and that body of water that you're in has also had implications that have occurred beyond this moment that you're in, that are affecting the choppiness of it, or the way in which it's responding and how it's moving and where it's flowing. And when you're in a sailboat, it's interesting because you're working with flow, but you're not just saying, okay, well, you push me wherever you want to push me. You're saying, I'll work with you, but I'm not necessarily going to do what you're doing. I'm going to do what I want to do in response to what you're doing. And if you deny it, man, you are done. Like, game over, capsize. It's done. Like it's over, and maybe worse. So so with especially when the wind is strong and the waves are big, this ability to go, okay, I'm going to work with what is happening. There's ultimate presence. And I was on this lake one time when I was sailing in this little boat, and I used to love when the wind would pick up on a lake. It was the most exciting thing to me. Usually they call all the boats back and they're like, "Oh, you can't be out in the water." But I just I'd always try and sneak out and get out there because I loved it because it's so frightening and so powerful at the same time. And this one particular time I was doing it, I was sailing and I was tipping the boat. So basically the wind's pushing the boat and it tips the boat sideways. And it's this point where you're sitting on the boat and your weight is holding the boat down and the wind's pushing. And the more you can kind of get your weight on the other side of it, you can take the brunt force of the wind and you can kind of ride this edge and you can get a massive amount of speed. But it's super frightening because at any moment, if you just do it wrong, your whole boat will capsize and you'll get thrown. And it's not like you get thrown like over face first onto the other side. And you got to remember you're on this boat and you're probably 4, 5, sometimes 6, maybe even more feet high, right? And so you're not just going to get thrown, you're going to get thrown from like 6 feet high or 8 feet high above the water into whatever. And that's, I don't know how to explain it, man. It is just a absolutely exhilarating and yet frightening feeling. And, I think like with what we're talking about, you have like with the do nothing, you have to let go of the fact that you are not controlling it all. There's so much at play. And we see this, you and I think we've seen this so much with acting, right? We've seen the actor act. They're going to act and they're going to show you their performance. They've done all this and they're trying to control too much. And you're like, nah, it's not real, man. I don't buy it. It's not true. Something's false. But then I think that's one of the things I really can appreciate about Meisner, which is, the modality you work with a lot, which is like, you have to respond to what the person's doing. Otherwise the whole thing falls apart and you get slammed on your face and it just doesn't work. It just all breaks down, and I think when people are, you're going through your life, you think, okay, well, I'm going to meditate. I'm going to be silent. I'm going to be, in the nothing. It doesn't mean that nature stopped, man. Far from it. In fact, what you're going to notice is how powerful it all is. And then what I think is cool is you can respond to it more honestly and more truthfully, which I think, you're going to give yourself that opportunity for that very exhilarating thing that you've been cutting yourself off at the knees at, quite frankly, because like, if you want to sail like the way I was describing, you have to be responsive to nature. That is the only way to do it. Otherwise, it will not work. You will get slammed. You will have a horrible time. And that's why they pull all the boats in, because people are not responding to the nature. And I'm not saying I'm great at it, but I respect it. And I can say that. And, and so, with the nothing, the art of doing nothing, when I'm sailing, I'm not doing anything other than what is the response to the truth. And it is the truth. And I can tell you that for a fact. It is the truth. And that's it. And it's the most exhilarating thing because you're riding a line. And if you get really good at it, you get really close. And I'm not going to say I'm great at it, but I'm good enough to ride in the line, at least for a little while. That place, that little pinnacle moment where you can do that, and like the longer you can do it, the better it is. That place is the most amazing place to live. It's on the knife edge, and you just keep pushing it and pushing it, and you just gonna go, how close can I go before this is over?
Yeah.
And you're doing nothing but exactly what you need to do. And then, I go back to this question. Did you beat your heart for the last 10 minutes? there's a point where you stop being the one that's doing it. It's just nature and you are nature and you're there and it's happening. And it's a incredible experience. I think people live for it. I think it's called the zone. I think it's everything, you know? And I don't think a lot of people always see meditation and things like this as the zone, but like, that's more what we're talking about. I think like, it's not always that exhilarating necessarily, but it is. And if you can catch it, you know, you're kind of like, oh man, like I'm in it, you know? And a lot of art too, for me, is very much like that. It's like when art hits you, it hit you in a way where you didn't expect it. And like what happened and you don't even know, you know, and it's quite a profound thing. I think it's part of the reason why I love art so much is just because of those special kind of, what is happening right now? Yeah.
No, I've definitely sailing's a terrific metaphor, I think, for a lot of this, because it's and I do my dad, he doesn't have the sailboat anymore. He sold it a couple of years ago. But I've gone on a number of trips with him. I think the longest one was like close to a week, and went out sailing on the ocean. And I definitely, you know, like I've been in some situations where it's like, you know, where we were on like swells of like 6 to 8 feet, which like they get way bigger than that. But when you're on that boat, it's like, holy shit, that feels intense, you know. And also been in the situation where like beautiful day, just have like a perfect wind, and had the boat just leaned right over. And, you know, I remember my dad being like, oh, she's like, she can take it. Like you can, like you, like it was a really a well-built boat, like with a big heavy keel on it. And it, like you pretty much couldn't tip this thing over if you wanted to, right? Like but it was still, I was just like, ooh, like, I'm like, I can't take this. I can't cut this into the wind anymore. Cause like, I'm not comfortable. I was like, oh, like, it's just like, this feels like enough right here. Like how much lean is on the boat right now. And it's
look at this Way of the Artist sailing podcast, right?
Yeah. And it's totally exhilarating, but you know, like so much of the appeal behind sailing is that, yeah. And one of the things that I've loved about, especially like, you know, getting out for like a several day trip, you know, is that there's really not much to be busy about when you're sailing. You know, it's like there's still things to do, right? When you need to do them.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's one of those, and like the ocean and the wind will connect you to the place that you're trying to get to. It's the connection is there, but you have to listen to it, right? You have to follow it. Because yeah, it's like, it doesn't give a shit about, you know, what you think it should be doing.
Yeah, totally.
It's doing what it's doing. And you just have to respond to that. But, you know, there's really not a ton of, you know, like other than like charting your sort of course for the day, and you throw up your sails and you know, and you go behind the helm and you point yourself in a direction, and, you know, you adjust the sails every now and then if you have to, and when the winds change or whatever. But it's one of those things that where for a lot of people, including myself, where it's like when you're out there, like there's just, it's one of those spaces where you can just kind of allow yourself to do nothing. Cause it's like, what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're on the boat, just be on and you just sort of be on the water, and, you know,
and don't do anything sometimes, because doing something is going to mess up your line. You know, if you're sailing a line, right, and maybe you're pushing a tilt and a lean, right, and it's like, you know, just hold, let it be, ride this out, you know, and there's something beautiful about just the stillness of being it, and you know, you're doing something, but you're not, like, this is the thing, and this is such a great metaphor for acting, if I can bring it back around to this just for a second. I guess for filmmaking and screenwriting and everything, really. But I'm going to focus on acting. When you get that moment, like we're talking about in sailing, that is where your acting really is going to live, right? That's where it's going to thrive because you're not doing anything more than what needs to be done. You're literally and we, if you are on that line, if you're walking that edge, we will go with you all the way. And you become, I like to think of the character in story in particular, and I suppose the actor is kind of playing that vehicle role. If you do this right, we will ride with you to the sunset. We will ride with you all the way, and we will be thankful to you for getting us there. But if you start going, oh, I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll show them all these fancy sailing tricks I have or acting tricks, it's like now we're like, what? Like this is messy. This is like all over the place. This is like stop it. You know what I mean? You're doing too much. You're too busy. You're too like you don't like why are you doing that? Just like listen, respond, act, and as things change and as things evolve, respond, act, but don't get caught doing anything more. Don't deny the reality. Don't upset the truth of this. Because once you upset the truth, the magic is gone, man. It's just gone. It's over. And well, I suppose you're all of a sudden in a new truth, and that's okay, but you got to accept that you're in the new truth, right? Like, maybe you mess up, but it's an accident. It's not intentional. And you find yourself, oh, we just did this. Okay, so now you're there. But be there. Don't try to be back where you were because you're not there right now. Now you're here. You can get back there, but start here. Start where you are, right? And that's so much about what doing nothing is like, because that's, Evan, I think that's where the doing something becomes a problem, particularly with acting, right? Like something goes wrong in the scene. We've talked about this a lot. And the actor suddenly starts to try to do something to correct it, but not in the nature of the scene anymore, but in the nature of, I got to fix this. I got to make this right because this is how it's supposed to go. And it's not supposed to go this way. And it's like, no, don't do anything. This is what happened. This is where we are. Let's let this live,
Yeah.
And that's really particularly true in theater, I would say, for sure.
Yeah. Like, I'm glad you brought that in because it's like, that's definitely something I can connect with and have a certain kind of understanding about. And what's emerging to me about this whole thing is that like that the constant doing of something, the constant busyness, the problem is that that constant doing of something means that you're pretty much always, that the doing something is always coming from confusion. Yeah, like it's always coming from a place of confusion because you haven't given yourself time for there to be any kind of clarity. And that's one of those things, like it's perfectly illustrated in the acting world, which is, part of what I love about it is because acting is such a medium and an art form of immediacy. It's one of the most, like, don't get me wrong, there's presence and immediacy that's involved in any and all art forms. It's just acting embodies it in such a direct and clear kind of way where it's just like you have to honor the moment. You have to honor the immediate thing, because if you don't, it's just so glaringly apparent that you're not. So because that's like one of those things where actors, where it's just like, when an actor doesn't know what to do, right, they immediately try to do something, right? And it's almost always a terrible idea, which is why like so many great actors through time have said, like, if you don't know what to do, don't do anything, right? Don't do anything. Stop. Be still. Listen to your partner. connect with them, right? What are they doing? Like respond to them, but don't try to do anything. You like essentially, and it's a lesson of like, go to a place of stillness, because if you try to do something, you're going to do something fucking stupid.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to do something totally inappropriate. You're going to try and force something, and like that. That's like one of the things like I hate more than anything is seeing an actor trying to force an emotion or push an emotion because, because they think that that's what they need to do. Or, sometimes it's a situation where you can see that like they're being, it can be an ego thing where you see an actor being kind of outacted to a certain extent. It's like you have they're working with a really great actor and they're tapped into something, and the other actor suddenly feels very self-conscious that they've got nothing going on. So then they try and push something, right? Because they're I got to try and match you, but they're not coming from anywhere.
No,
right?
They're coming from ego. I mean, I got to match you, right? Like if that's what they're trying to do, right? And that's, I mean, yeah.
And it's coming from confusion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the problem. The constant activity, when you're just in constant activity, it means that you start to work more and more from a place of confusion. I think that's what's becoming kind of clear to me in this conversation, is that, because activity isn't, and doing things is not necessarily coming from a place of confusion, but if there was no stillness from which it came out of, then there's a good chance that it's that the activity is coming out of confusion, right? And when you're working out of confusion, you're working out of fear.
Mm-hmm.
You're working out of, you're not necessarily working from a place of genuine meaning, genuine passion. Like it's just as you said, it's just busy. And I don't know, that for me, this is kind of like a big thing for myself that I'm seeing in this conversation.
I think you're bringing up some great stuff. I mean, as we've gone down this journey of this conversation, it's been a really great talk for looking at, I think, doing nothing in a more practical and like sensical, kind of like purposeful way, where, it's not so much that you need to know what you need to do. This is kind of like I'm interpreting, I suppose, but it's not so much that you're like, okay, I'm not gonna do anything because like that will lead to my self-improvement or I'll be better. Like, not like that. Don't, like, that's ego. That's the confusion, right? So it's like, you don't do anything because then you can hear, you can see, you can sense, you can pick it up, and then you can respond appropriately, real, and these thoughts, right? Like if you stop, I found this for myself, right? I stop and my mind just starts going, it's just trucking along. It's like, well, this, and you got to do that. And you got to, and you're just like, okay, all right. I hear you. Thank you. My mind is going. That is what's happening right now. The motion of my mental faculties are like the wind. They're on a motion and they are going, and this is what is happening, and it stops being a specific thought, but like that is the sound of the wind that it makes as it blows this way, right? And so then you go, okay, now I'm going to respond to you. This is what you're doing. I don't have to do exactly where you're trying to push me, but I'm going to respond to you. And then, like, one thing with sailing, right? Like they call it tacking, right? So you tack and you use the wind, but you go in a different angle than the wind is necessarily going. And most often you actually wouldn't go in direct line with the wind, but whatever. And so you use the wind, but it pushes you in the direction you want to go, but you're not denying the force that's at play. So your mind is running in a certain direction, but you don't go, no, you can't run that way. You can't go that way. That's not okay. You just go, no, that's the way you're running. That's the way you're blowing. That's the way you're moving. And I will respond to that. And eventually you will change because nature just changes, right? But our mind can be like a storm. And I think if we try to stop the storm, that's a mistake. That's trying to control nature. And that's just out of reality. It's not in truth, right? And I think sometimes we think, well, it's my body, it's my mind, I can control everything. And there's a lot of self-help gurus that are like, you can control your thoughts and your state and all of this stuff. And it's like, yes, to a degree you can, but not entirely, but to a degree.
Yeah.
But you can't deny reality. If you start denying reality, like, you're going to wind up in trouble. So yes, you can, a better analogy or a better description would be, you can respond with state. You can respond with emotion. You can respond to the nature of the flow of where you're going and what's happening. And like, if you're freezing and you just want to pretend in your mind that you're warm, if it's cold enough, you'll just freeze to death. You don't get to just pretend that you're warm. It might help. It might actually help your body sort some things out. But like, if it gets cold enough, it doesn't matter. You're just going to freeze to death. So you don't just get to change it because it's not what fits for you. Right. And so doing nothing, I think, to me, like a lot of what's kind of coming up to me with this is like, yeah, it gives me a chance to just stop, pay attention, recognize what's actually happening here, and then work with that as opposed to fighting it all the time. And I think, a lot of times people, and including myself, and I'm sure you're, like we all do it, right? We fight it. It's like, let's stop fighting it. Let's work with it. Let's acknowledge this is what's happening and let's move with it, as opposed to trying to say, no, this is wrong. It needs to be different. It's like, no, sorry, that's how it is. So what are you going to do? And by the way, be grateful, because it's actually a creative force as well. If you're trying to be an artist, right? It's actually a creative gift. And if you embrace it, you might find that it's actually giving you something wonderful that you actually would love to have. If you stopped fighting it, you'd actually like, oh man, what a wonderful thing I've been given. I didn't expect it. I wasn't planning on it. Wasn't trying to make that be, but it is. And here I am. One last thing I'll say, Evan, I used to have this acting teacher, June B. Wild, and I studied with her for quite a few years, and we had a lot of great classes together. But she used to always say this one thing, and always stick with me, and I'll never forget it. But like, actors would come in and they'd be like, like, I'm trying to do the scene, but I feel this way and blah, blah, blah. And she'd be like, use it. Fuck. Use it.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, yeah, because that's what's going on. So you might as well use it. Stop like trying to make it different. If it's what's going on, at least start from there, But if you just try to change it and you try to say, no, this is wrong, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I mean, look, that's how you're feeling. It is what it is. Right. And, I think is maybe you get a little bit, better at understanding yourself, and I'm sure like a more experienced actor might say, well, I have some techniques or some strategies on how to deal with that. Okay, great. But like, if you're a newer actor, man, just work with the feeling that you already have, as just a way to get used to what it is to feel truthful. Yeah. As like an idea. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about acting a bit. I feel like it all relates though.
Yeah. Oh, for sure, man. For sure. Let's talk some beer and I think let's wrap this one up.
Sounds good.
What do you say?
Sounds good, dude.
All right.
Well,
I'll go first. I'm drinking one that I don't believe I've had before, or either of us have had on here. So I'm drinking the Alpha Juicy Lager from Academy Brewing in Vancouver.
Nice.
And it's delicious. Like, it's like light and crisp, but it's got some stuff happening flavor wise in it that's elevates it, I guess, to beyond just kind of like your traditional lager, while still making it nice and refreshing, easy to drink. So it's a winner.
Very
it's a winner
cool.
For me.
Very cool. Okay, well, I have a very interesting beer. This is a very unusual beer, and it's a rare it's kind of a rare opportunity to actually have it, which is part of the reason why I got it. Unity Brew. That's what the name of this dry hopped lager is. It's called Unity Brew. And the reason why it's called Unity Brew is because in Alberta, a bunch of these major breweries. They all came together and they just have beer and they drink and they talk and they make a brew together. So I went to Blindman Brewing, which is where I've been going recently to get a bunch of brews. And Blindman Brewing had a part to do with, but also I'll read off a bunch of these because like there's so many people that are involved in this. So Grizzly Paw Brewing, Born Brewing, Hard Knocks Brewing, Bow River Brewing, Hawktail Brewing, Brewster's Brewing, Hell's Basement Brewing, Cabin Brewing, Hubtown Brewing, I suppose, Old's College Brewery, Tail Gunner Brewery, Rail Yard Brewery, Talking Dog Brewing, Rapid Ascent Brewing, Three Beers Brewing, Ravenwolf Micro Brewery, Tool Shed Township 24, and I think I covered just about all of them. Okay, so anyway, so all these breweries came together. It's really nice beer. I mean, there's so much on this. What's really interesting, and I'll say one last thing about this beer, which is very tasty, and I've enjoyed it. And it's probably one of those ones like, I don't know, maybe I'll never have it again because it's so rare. But this is everything on this can, if you can see, if you're on video and you can see this, so everything on this can is a sticker. It's all a sticker. So you like everything is a decal, like everything. So you can just take all this off and you can put it on mugs or whatever. So it's nice. It's kind of an interesting thing, man. But I was telling the brewery about our podcast and how this thing started, and they were like, "Oh, it's so cool!" And then they started like just giving me this beer and that beer and whatever, and they're like, "Oh, you got to try this one." And I was like, "Well, that's great. That would be great to talk about on the podcast because, you know, there is the brewery culture here in Alberta that I've been kind of welcomed into, and what's really interesting, Evan, and I got to mention this. So one thing that's very interesting about Alberta is Alberta and the breweries actually they have a lot to do. A lot of these ones have a lot to do with artistry. So, for example, at Blind Man Brewing, they get writers to write a story, and on every can, there's different stories that are written by local artists. So, like, you pick up a can, you read the story, you pick up another can, totally different story. You pick up another can, totally different story. And so there's these just art that's published. And so there's other breweries apparently, and I forget the names, but they actually get artists to come in and like design their brew. And so their brew can and all of this stuff, so that you might have a different picture on every can that they have and stuff. Just really cool stuff. And I didn't realize, I thought this was so interesting because, you know, we talk sometimes about the art of craft brewery and all of that, but it's so neat to see that breweries actually are themselves coming out to artists and mirroring kind of an artistry and craft brew thing that's going on. This is really cool. So anyway, I thought I'd mention that. Yeah.
No, that's great. I love to hear that. Love to hear that kind of community collaboration and stuff like that. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, shall I go first with some closing comments?
Sure, man.
All right. Well, you know, kind of the last thing that just sort of popped into my mind reminds me of back in 2016 when I spent a year doing a course in miracles, which was a fascinating journey of itself. But I remember, you know, every day you're sort of given these meditations, and I remember there was this one, and that has a lot to do with what we're talking about, and I think is maybe a helpful angle on this, you know, in terms of like, you know, the art of doing nothing. And part of that, I think, is the understanding, coming to the understanding for ourselves that we actually don't need to do anything. Not really. You know, like on a sort of a big grand scale perspective, we don't need to do anything. You know, you don't need to go to your job. You don't need to, talk to your partner. You don't need to, like there's so many things that you don't need to do it. Doesn't mean that there's not, like there's outcomes for all of these things, right? But that we actually don't need to do anything. There's nothing that we actually have to do. and the more you actually consider it and think about how that's actually true, because we can get caught up in so much of these things of of thinking that we have to do all of these things, and you actually don't. It doesn't mean that there might not be, some challenging consequences as a result of these things, but that still doesn't change the fact that you don't have to do things, right? And there's a kind of, you can sense a kind of freedom in it. Once you let go of all of the sort of feelings of having to do things, there's this sort of freedom in being able to more fully decide what to do, to engage in maybe the same things, to still do the same things, but with the understanding that you don't have to do it. Mm-hmm. And when it no longer comes with this obligation, there's a new quality that can emerge from it. I think that more of yourself can emerge into what you're doing, because it no longer is carrying the baggage of obligation. It's becomes something that you're choosing to do, right? It becomes something that you are actually, saying yes to, right? So I think that's one kind of an interesting way to really think about that. Ask yourself that question, or something that you can just say to yourself periodically, of just like I don't need to do anything, or I need to do nothing, I think was how it was presented to me. But you need to do nothing, and really start to understand how that's true, because I think that can really help us connect to the actual space of doing nothing, and give us that sort of, give us a little bit of that stillness that we need more of.
Well, to if I can comment on that, I think a reframe that I really like is, instead of saying I have to do this, say I get to do this. And that comes from a place of gratitude and appreciation. So there are times where, there's these things and you're like, man, I'm really tired. I just want to go to bed. I just want to be on my own. I don't want to have to deal with this, whatever it might be. And you might say, but I have to do this thing. It's like, well, look, if you have a kid, or you have a partner, or you have something that you really love and appreciate in your life, and it's like a good thing in your life, and you can acknowledge it's a good thing in your life, and you want it in your life, instead of looking at I have to, look at it like you get to. And, there's these things in life that a lot of times you will not appreciate them until they're gone. And if you can get ahead of that, if you can figure out a way to recognize that, hey, look, this might not always be here. These things may not always be the way they are. One thing, I know you just had a child, and I have a lot of friends that have children. It's kind of being the uncle to many children that I get to experience this. But, your child's never going to be this age again. It's never going to be this way ever again. And I know it's hard. I know it's challenging. I know sometimes you're tired. But you get this right now, and it's going to go away. And they're still going to be around, but it's going to go away. It's going to be gone, and you'll miss it, and you'll long for it one day. So try to get ahead of the thing that way, you don't have to do anything but appreciate it, right? And you don't even have to appreciate it, but you could appreciate it, right? And so there's that this kind of spurred that thought, and I thought was worth sharing. The other thing I would say is to go back to the sailing analogy, because I don't know, I had a lot of fun with that one. I kind of liked where it led with this conversation. The storm comes, and some people go, oh, we got to go back. And some people like me go, amazing, we get a storm. But I mean, there's a certain point where I'm like, the storm's big enough, I got to go back. I'm going to go back. I want to go back. I don't have to, but I want to. Right. And so, you know, just because the winds change, just because things, you know, happen when you're actually paying attention and you're being responsive to the nature around you, because we are talking about doing nothing, doesn't mean you necessarily have to do anything other than what is a truthful response. And I think the thing is, when we're talking about the art of doing nothing, we're not actually talking about doing nothing, because it's impossible. That's not going to happen. You will not just stop. It just doesn't work that way. Your mind will keep running, your heart will keep beating, your breath will keep breathing. You know, all of this stuff will just keep happening, right? And if you were to stop it all, you know, it wouldn't, first of all, it wouldn't work. Second of all, the consequences would be bad, and, you know, whatever, you're not going to do it. So like, just give it up, right? So like, the other thing is like, do nothing is not necessarily do nothing, but it's like, don't do any more than what is right now, and let this happen. Let this be, and respond truthfully to it. And I think also, when it comes to the busyness, and just to bring it back to that one other element, I think, which is important and very parallel to this, just because you're not, quote unquote, doing anything, don't just make yourself busy to feel comfortable or better. You know, this, if I could give anybody some practical advice with this, sit with it. Just let it be. Let it happen. Let this just exist. And be open to the fact that if you let this thing like be, if you don't try to move it or fix it or change it or alter it, and you just let it be, that you will come to some awarenesses or some enlightenments that might be worth that extra moment. And maybe that extra moment is 30 seconds. Maybe that extra moment is 30 minutes. Maybe it's 3 hours. I don't know. But when you walk away with a great discovery in the nothingness, you realize why the nothingness was all worth it anyway. And you didn't even know what you were looking for, and you didn't even know what you'd find, but yet there you are, and you found it, and now you're there, and okay, and it could change your life forever. And I think that's kind of the cool thing. And that's really where the art of doing nothing really exists. It's in this creative flow of, you're letting it almost show you and come out of you without you needing to make it happen. You're letting it happen, and all you're doing is being kind of present enough to catch it, to notice it, to see it, you know? And there's an art in that, because I actually believe that's what art is. For me, that's so much of what art is. And that's what storytelling is that story kind of is always just passing through me. And then all of a sudden, you know, I stop for a moment. I go, oh, that would be interesting. That would be worthwhile. That would be something. And then, but that happened in the nothing. And I was paying attention enough to catch it. And now look at me. I'm writing a novel, I'm writing a screenplay, I'm writing something, and I'm doing something I love. But I was just not busy for a moment long enough to capture something and let that thing be explored.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.